You think you're free, but inside, you're chained, and you don't even notice. Jung said the worst prison is the one where a man believes he's in control, when in reality, he's just a puppet of his own shadow. And the most tragic part? Most people die this way. Trapped in an invisible cycle, repeating patterns they despise, craving what destroys them, sabotaging themselves with a smile on their face, believing they're good, rational, conscious, but they're nothing more than wounded puppets trying to look strong. Today, you're going to discover what Carl Jung revealed about the kind of man who will never be free. And maybe you'll realize that man is you. You might have a job. You might make your own decisions. You might choose what to wear, who to be with, what to post on social media. You might even believe you're in control of your life. But that doesn't mean you're free. Because true prison has no bars. It lives in your mind. And most people, as Jung would say, go through life without ever realizing this. They obey impulses they don't understand, are driven by fears they can't name, and cling to desires that were never truly theirs. They think they're choosing, when in reality, they're just reacting. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is the most sophisticated trap anyone can fall into, living an entire life thinking they're in charge, when everything they do is just a repetition of invisible patterns inherited from childhood, culture, and family history. There's no prison more effective than the one that doesn't look like a prison. This is the kind of man Jung described as fundamentally unfree. Not because he lacks intelligence, but because he lacks the courage to look inward. He runs from silence, from emptiness, from the mirror. He distracts himself with entertainment, work, pornography, social media. He lives in constant activity, not to be productive, but to avoid facing the pain of who he really is. Because deep down, he knows he's not whole. He feels fragmented, divided between who he is and who he thinks he should be. But instead of facing that wound, he prefers to stay on autopilot. He puts on a mask, a social role, and keeps performing, adapting, shaping himself, until he completely forgets who he is. And the most dangerous part? This kind of man is applauded by society. They call it maturity, responsibility, success. They say he grew up, when in truth, he just learned how to fit in. The world rewards those who adjust, not those who free themselves. And that's why so many live lives that aren't truly theirs, defending values they never questioned, chasing things that never fulfill them. They don't live, they just function. For Jung, freedom begins when a man dares to enter into conflict with himself, when he questions his most intimate beliefs, when he realizes that not every desire is legitimate, that many of his impulses are compensations for unresolved trauma, that his ambition is often disguised fear, that his hunger for power is merely a desperate attempt to not feel powerless again, like when he was a child. But how many have the courage to admit this? How many have the strength to shatter the idealized image they've built of themselves? Most would rather stay blind, because to see is painful. To truly see yourself demands sacrifice, and it demands something even rarer, responsibility. Because once you see, you can no longer hide behind ignorance. From that point on, everything you tolerate, everything you do or fail to do becomes a choice. And that kind of awareness is terrifying. That's why so many choose the prison. Because deep down, it's comfortable, predictable. You know where you are, what to expect, what to do. Freedom, on the other hand, is chaotic, unpredictable. It demands self-knowledge. It demands breaking ties. It demands facing fears. It asks you to let go of everything that brought you this far, including parts of yourself. And that's a price not everyone is willing to pay. That's why Jung said, freedom extends only as far as the limits of our ignorance. In other words, as long as there are parts of yourself you refuse to know, there will be forces controlling you from behind the scenes. And you will go on being a puppet, convinced you're the author. The true enemy of freedom isn't external oppression. It's internal cowardice, the refusal to look within, the resistance to change what needs to be changed. And that is the kind of man who will never be free, the one who runs from himself. He's charming, creative, spontaneous, always full of brilliant ideas and grand dreams. He hates routine, despises hierarchies, rejects any form of authority. He wants to live intensely, without ties, without obligations. At first glance, he seems free. But behind the sparkle in his eyes and the fiery speech, there's an escape. Because this man, this eternal youth as Jung called him, doesn't want to grow up. He wants to remain in the realm of possibilities, where anything can still happen, where nothing is final, where he doesn't have to choose, or commit, or face the weight of reality. The poor Eternus is the man who mistakes freedom for escape. He believes that to grow up is to die, that to mature is to sell out, that to take on responsibility is to betray oneself. So he stays in constant motion, from project to passion, idea to idea. He never settles, never goes deep, never carries a decision through to the end, because deep down he fears what that might reveal about himself. If he's always starting, he never has to face the fear of failure, or worse, the fear of being ordinary. And the cruelest part is that he knows something's wrong. He knows there's a void that won't be filled. But he rationalizes it, says it's because he hasn't found the right thing, the right person, the right moment. The truth is, he's trapped in the illusion of total freedom, trapped in the fear of limitation, trapped in his own emotional childhood, where everything was protected, magical, and free of responsibility. He rejects structure because he thinks it's a prison, but he doesn't see that the absence of structure has left him vulnerable, unstable, and alone. Jung didn't see the puer merely as a personality trait, but as a deep archetypal dynamic, the desire to live only in the realm of spirit, fantasy, and lightness without ever touching the ground of reality, without dealing with pain, frustration, or the hard work needed to build something solid. He is the kind of man forever seduced by the idea of what's possible, but terrified by the concreteness of what is. He dreams of great deeds, but never brings them to life. He speaks passionately about his plans, but sabotages himself at the first obstacle. He may appear bold, but his greatest cowardice lies in avoiding the discomfort that comes with commitment. This archetype is so present in modern culture that it's almost become an ideal. The culture of don't get attached, follow your heart, live in the now is the perfect disguise for chronic immaturity. We're encouraged to break limits, but not to sustain them, to break relationships, but not to repair them, to dream big, but not to work hard. And the result is a generation of men who seem free, but are completely lost, rootless, directionless, hollow. And perhaps the most tragic part is what Jung called the shadow of the puer, the cynical, resentful old man he becomes with time. Because this man, who ran from adulthood, eventually collides with the reality of time. And then he sees how much his so-called freedom cost him. He sees the deep relationships he lost, the lasting things he never built, the potential that remained on paper. Then comes the bitterness, the victimhood, the narrative that the world didn't understand him, that people weren't ready for him. But deep down, he knows it was he who wasn't ready for life.
True freedom is not about fleeing structure. It's about knowing which structures you choose to build. Freedom isn't about avoiding commitment. It's about being able to commit to what truly matters. It's not about rejecting limits. It's about knowing where to place your own. The truly free man, according to Jung, is the one who integrates the puer with the cynics, the dreamer with the wise elder. He keeps the flame of inspiration alive, but supports it with discipline. He dares to imagine, but knows how to execute. He preserves lightness, but doesn't run from weight. And this integration only happens when a man stops running, when he agrees to look at his shadow, when he faces the fact that his constant escape isn't a lifestyle, it's a reflection of his fear of himself. Because true maturity begins when a man realizes that freedom isn't doing whatever he wants. It's having enough awareness to know what's worth doing, and the courage to stand by that choice. The man who runs from himself ends up imprisoned in the very part of himself he refuses to face. Jung said, "Until you become conscious, the unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what happens with the kind of man who will never be free. He thinks he's making decisions, thinks he's in control, thinks he's aware. But his choices are being made by the internal forces he never wanted to confront. He acts out of impulse, out of anger, out of fear, out of a need for approval, and doesn't even realize it. Because the part of him that truly governs his life is hidden. And that part has a name: shadow. The shadow for Jung is everything the ego refuses to recognize. Everything a man has repressed, denied, or exiled within himself because he deemed it unacceptable, weak, ugly, or dangerous. But it doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. It becomes sabotage. It becomes addiction. It becomes reactivity. It becomes attraction to what destroys. And worst of all, it becomes projection. The man starts to see outside what actually exists inside. He blames others for his lack of direction. He accuses the world of his mediocrity. He sees the enemy in others when the true enemy lives inside him, silently shaping every decision he makes. This man thinks he's free because he has options, but the options he chooses always lead him to the same place: frustration, repetition, emptiness. Because as long as the shadow governs, he never truly chooses. He only reacts. Reacts to the fear of seeming weak. Reacts to the shame of failure. Reacts to the need to be accepted. He doesn't build, he compensates. He doesn't live, he flees from pain. And the more he tries to avoid the darkness within, the more it takes over everything around him. And here's a truth few have the courage to accept. The shadow is not made up only of what is morally bad. It also contains everything a man was conditioned to repress, including his strength, his ambition, his personal power. Many men today are disconnected from their own potential because they were taught to fear it. They were molded to please, to conform, to never disturb. And that obedience breeds revolt. A silent rage, a hidden resentment that grows until it explodes in distorted forms, in violence and passive aggression, in the sabotage of their own achievements.
The shadow is dangerous precisely because it's invisible. You don't see it, but it sees you, and it knows exactly where to strike. That's why integrating the shadow is an act of brutal courage. It means looking at the worst in you without turning away. It means recognizing that you can be manipulative, weak, jealous, cruel, and still take responsibility. It means accepting the totality of who you are without masks. Because as long as you insist on being only the nice guy, the good man, the strong one, or the smart one, the part you repressed will find ways to sabotage everything you build. And here's more. The shadow is the key to power. Yes, power. Jung knew this. What you repress, if faced with courage, becomes a source of vital energy. The man who faces his shadow stops being reactive. He becomes grounded, dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a deep sense. He knows his own darkness and is no longer controlled by it. This man is not easily manipulated. He doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't react like a cornered animal, because he's already done the inner work. He's already faced his own hell and survived. This is the paradox most people reject. True freedom requires facing what is least free within you. You cannot be free if you are still a slave to your traumas, your complexes, your unresolved needs. The free man isn't the one who fears the least. He is the one who has learned to carry fear with dignity. Not the one who never makes mistakes, but the one who has stopped running from them. He doesn't project, he takes responsibility. He doesn't justify, he corrects. And above all, he no longer needs to pretend to be someone. He has become someone real. To integrate the shadow is not to lose yourself. It is the beginning of truly finding yourself. It's when a man for the first time can look in the mirror without turning away, because now he knows who is standing there, and he knows he's ready to hold his life with both hands. Some people shout freedom, but live being pulled by invisible chains. Have you noticed how some men speak in a rebellious, bold, even aggressive tone? They talk as if they don't follow rules, as if they're above average, as if they owe nothing to anyone. But take a closer look and you'll see, they're not at peace. They're not in control. The restlessness in their eyes, the constant need to prove something, the destructive cycles that repeat without pause, all show that behind that pose of autonomy lies nothing more than a brutal fear of facing their own emptiness. Jung knew that. An inflated ego is just as sick as a fragile one. The man who keeps shouting that he's free is usually trying to convince himself. He rejects authority because he fears being dominated. He attacks the system because he doesn't want to submit. He breaks off relationships because he can't bear to feel vulnerable. But all of that only reveals what he's trying to hide, his inner prison. A prison built from traumas, unresolved wounds, old rejections. And no matter how hard he tries to look strong, independent, untouchable, deep down he's just a boy afraid of being hurt again. This rootless rebellion is, in truth, a defense, a mask. The man who hasn't faced his unconscious lives trying to compensate for it in the conscious world. So he flaunts, shouts, confronts. He distances himself from anything that threatens him emotionally. But that's not strength, it's escape. It's the refusal to truly see himself. Because if he stops, if he gets quiet, if he looks inside, he'll have to admit he doesn't know who he is. And that's more terrifying than any external authority.
And here comes a brutal truth. True freedom has nothing to do with rejecting limits. It has everything to do with choosing your limits consciously. The man who rebels against everything isn't free. He's reactive. He is a slave to the opposite. If the crowd goes left, he runs right, but not because he believes in it. Rather, because he needs to prove he's not like the others. And what is that if not just another form of dependence? His identity depends on what he rejects. He doesn't act with purpose, he merely reacts. Jung saw this all the time. Men who thought they were strong just because they didn't trust anyone, who believed they were free only because they couldn't commit, who called themselves independent but were secretly starving for validation, even if disguised. It's as if they confused autonomy with isolation, strength with coldness, independence with pride. But inside, they were exhausted. Because sustaining a rigid persona is draining. Always trying to prove something corrodes the soul. Running from yourself requires inhuman effort. And there's something even more dangerous. This type of man is easily manipulated, precisely because he thinks he can't be manipulated. He rejects advice, despises wisdom, discredits anything that comes from the outside, and becomes easy prey for extreme ideologies, shady gurus, or self-destructive impulses. Rebellion without self-knowledge is the perfect fuel for the illusion of control. He thinks he's in charge, but it's his fear that's calling the shots. Fear of being weak, fear of attachment, fear of being hurt again. And until that is recognized, he will keep running, thinking he's evolving. The truly free man doesn't need to shout. He doesn't need to prove himself. He doesn't reject everything. He chooses. He knows when to yield, when to assert, when to retreat. Because his freedom comes from within, not from the need to oppose others. He doesn't react, he acts. He doesn't live in opposition to the world, he lives in alignment with his essence. He's already walked through the fire of self-knowledge. He's faced his own chaos. He's descended into the basement of his soul and returned more whole. And that's why he now walks with steadiness. Freedom isn't the absence of limits, it's the awareness of them. It isn't shouting, "No one controls me." It's knowing who's truly in command. And if that command comes from anger, from trauma, from emotional scarcity, then there's no freedom, only another prison, just one with a prettier facade. The worst prison is the one you don't even realize you're in. You may think you're making your own choices, that you're in control of your life, your decisions, your path. But behind every impulsive reaction, every reoccurring pattern, every mistake repeated a third time, something larger is operating, something Jung called autonomous complexes, fragments of the psyche that live with a will of their own, reacting, sabotaging, interfering without your awareness. And the most dangerous part, they always disguise themselves as you. You think you're angry at someone for a valid reason, but really it's an inferiority complex masked as wounded pride. You believe you're leaving a relationship because the other person doesn't understand you, but deep down, it's your abandonment complex that makes you flee whenever someone gets too close. You swear you're being rational, but it's just fear in the mask of logic. Every time you repeat a pattern without knowing why, it's a complex behind the wheel. And you, thinking you're the driver, are just watching the crash happen. These complexes are born from pain, from trauma, from undigested experiences, from words that scarred you as a child, from rejections you never healed from. And what's most frightening is they evolve into entire belief systems. You start to see the world through them, to react as if you're constantly reliving the past, as if every new person were a disguised version of someone old. And thus, your life stops being real and becomes a repetitive play, an endless reenactment of a wound that never healed. Jung warned, until you become conscious of a complex, it dominates you, and you call it fate. You think it's bad luck, that life conspires against you, that all people are the same. But in truth, it's the same old trauma steering your life, just wearing a new mask. The same fear, the same pain, the same guilt. Only now, it's tangled up with your identity. And then it becomes hard to tell what's truly you and what's just the echo of what hurts you.
That's why self-knowledge is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If you don't know yourself deeply, you'll be manipulated from the inside out, not by politicians or companies or even your parents, but by your own complexes. You'll become predictable, reactive, vulnerable to any situation that touches your wound. Someone raises their voice and you explode. Someone pulls away and you beg. Someone compliments you and you cling. Your life becomes controlled by external stimuli because your internal world is in ruins. And there's no point trying to control others if you're still ruled by yourself. No point studying power, strategy, manipulation if you're a hostage to your unprocessed emotions. Because the moment someone pushes your button, your entire power game collapses, and you're back to being that scared little boy. Only now, trapped in an adult body with bills to pay and an ego too inflated to admit he's still afraid. Freedom begins when you look inside and recognize, this is not me. This is a wounded part of me trying to protect me. And in that moment, something shifts. The complex loses its power. You take the wheel. For the first time, you don't react, you choose. For the first time, you don't run, you face. And that's when real transformation begins. Because as long as you identify with the complex, you live in chains. But when you observe it with awareness, it becomes just a part of you, no longer the whole. Most men will spend their lives trying to control the world without ever realizing that the real enemy has always been inside. They'll fight bosses, governments, exes, the system, but never trace their prison back to its root. They'll never look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm the one sabotaging my own freedom. And that's tragic, because a man who does not master himself will be mastered by anyone who knows how to press his internal buttons. And in the end, here's the great irony. The complex just wants to protect you. It was formed to keep you safe at a time when you were too vulnerable to handle pain. But now, it keeps you small. It stops you from growing, from trusting, from loving, from risking. It stops you from being whole. And until you have the courage to deactivate this protection system, you will never truly be free. The most comfortable prison is the one the world applauds. You were taught to be strong, to hide your pain, to never show weakness, to be the pillar of the family, the provider, the one who bears everything in silence. And at some point, maybe without realizing it, you put on that armor. You shaped yourself to fit expectations, cut pieces of yourself to fit the mold of the real man. And what looked like strength was just anesthesia.
Jung called this the persona, the social mask you create to survive, to be accepted, to function in the world. At first, it seems necessary. It protects you, helps you be heard, respected, desired. But over time, if you identify with it too much, you begin to forget who's behind the mask. You become the mask. And then, everything that doesn't fit that role must be repressed. Your emotions, your fears, your sensitivity, your doubts, your vulnerability, all locked away in the basement of your psyche. And that's where the collapse begins. Because the cost of being the strong man all the time is to live in denial. It's smiling when you want to cry, saying, I'm fine, when you're falling apart inside. Isolating yourself while pretending to be self-sufficient when what you really want is to be held without judgment. But since that desire doesn't fit the image of the invincible guy you forced yourself to be, you stay silent. And the silence slowly kills you. Men like this become invulnerable on the outside and hollow on the inside. They maintain composure while their inner world crumbles. They know how to assert themselves, but not how to listen to themselves. They know how to conquer, but not how to surrender. They know how to lead, but not how to ask for help. Because they learn to associate vulnerability with weakness. And the soul, suffocated by this performance, begins to silently fall ill. That persona, built to protect, begins to suffocate you. You become a caricature of yourself. You react aggressively when your image is threatened. You control everything around you because you fear facing the emptiness inside. You become addicted to performance, validation, power, but every victory tastes like nothing. Because deep down, you know that's not you. It's just the character you created to avoid rejection. And the more you invest in that mask, the farther you drift from yourself. And the tragedy is that the world rewards the persona. People admire you, follow you, praise you, and that reinforces the prison. Because the more applause the mask gets, the more terrified you are to take it off. What if I show who I really am and no one likes it? What if my pain looks like weakness? What if my truth makes me lose everything? And so you stay quiet. You smile, you perform, you endure, until the body breaks down, until the soul collapses, until all that's left is a sophisticated emptiness, full of external achievements but disconnected from any inner meaning. Jung said, "What you resist persists, and what you deny controls you." When you deny your pain, it grows in the dark. When you hide your shadow, it returns through the back door. In your impulses, your addictions, your outbursts. And the worst part, the stronger your persona, the more repressed your soul. and the farther you are from true freedom. Because there's no freedom without truth, and no truth while you're living a role. But there is a way out, and it begins with a radical act of courage, facing the mask, asking yourself with brutal honesty, who would I be without this character? And yes, it's terrifying, because you might realize you've spent years, maybe an entire life, playing a role that wasn't yours. But at the same time, it's liberating, because for the first time, you stop performing and start existing. The soul doesn't want you to be perfect. It wants you to be whole, with your light and your shadow, with your strength and your fragility, with your courage and your fear. And only when you embrace all your parts do you begin to become a true man. Not the man the world idealizes, but the man you were born to be. Real, authentic, deep, and above all, free. The shadow always charges the price of silence. You can hide your anger, you can deny your envy, you can bury your fears, your traumas, your most unmentionable desires. You can tell yourself you're a good, controlled, balanced, rational person. You can repeat that everything's fine, that it's just stress, just tiredness, just another phase. But the psyche doesn't tolerate lies for long, and everything you pretend not to see grows in the dark, waiting for the right moment to collect the debt. Carl Jung was clear. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is everything you refuse to become. Everything that was rejected, morally condemned, emotionally forgotten. It's your unexpressed anger, your repressed sexuality, your stifled ambition, your invalidated pain. And the more you try to hide these forces, the more they rule you from behind the scenes. You see it in disproportionate outbursts, in behaviors you can't explain, in addictions that seemed harmless at first but eat you alive, in relationships you sabotage without knowing why, in decisions you repeat even when you know they'll destroy you. Because the shadow refuses to be ignored. It wants to be seen. It wants to be integrated. And if you don't do it consciously, it finds other ways to show up. More brutal, more destructive, more uncontrollable. That's when the divided man is born. The one who seems in control but lives on the edge of the abyss. Who smiles in public but carries shameful impulses in secret. Who speaks of self-control but has fits of rage even he can't understand.
But true freedom requires something far more difficult. Facing who you are, without filters, without excuses, without masks. And few are willing to undergo that kind of confrontation. Carl Jung said, "Until you become conscious, the unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's it. Most people go through life thinking they're in control, when in fact they're just passengers inside their own minds, reacting to unresolved trauma, living under inherited beliefs, running from pains they've never had the courage to name. And here's the truth no one wants to hear. The man who never confronts his shadow side may appear strong, but he lives in a cage. He is a prisoner of his own image, a slave to the approval of others, a hostage to his persona. He might have success, status, respect. He might seem like a model of discipline and leadership, but inside him there is a growing void, a voice that whispers in the dark, "You're lying to yourself." And that whisper, over time, becomes a scream. It becomes insomnia. It becomes anxiety. It becomes self-sabotage. It becomes the slow destruction of everything he built. Because the freedom Jung speaks of isn't the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to be who you are, whole, complex, contradictory, human. It's the freedom to look in the mirror and not flinch, to look into the eyes of someone you love and not pretend, to be alone and not need to run from your own presence. But to get there, you have to die, not physically, but in the ego, in the persona you built to be accepted, in the character you fed to survive. You have to let that man die so a new one can be born. And this process is violent. It's mourning everything you pretended to be, the collapse of your certainties, the fall from your pedestal, the rupture with everything that was comfortable but false. And only after this, on the ground, bleeding, maskless, unarmed, does reconstruction begin. And here's what no one tells you. There is no awakening without pain, no freedom without loss, because truth destroys before it frees. But when you accept this, when you stop running, stop justifying, stop hiding, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the numbed peace of avoidance, but the peace that comes from being whole, from no longer needing to prove anything, from no longer needing to control everything, from no longer needing to keep up the act. This is real freedom, the kind that only comes after chaos, after the fall, after the shadow. When you understand that true power isn't in dominating others, it's in stopping the lies you tell yourself.
Who speaks of freedom but is imprisoned by his own demons? Because the more you fight the shadow, the more power it gains, and the more fragile you become. And that explains why so many successful men collapse, why so many leaders, fathers, husbands, and entrepreneurs live in inner war, because they try to be only light, only reason, only strength, but are haunted by everything they fail to include. And life collects the bill. The body falls ill, relationships implode, the void expands, and one day, everything crumbles. And don't fool yourself into thinking this is for the weak. In truth, the stronger the persona, the more dangerous the shadow. The man who's never cried may be the most violent. The one who never admitted fear may be the most cruel. The one who never faced his pain may be the one who hurts others most, because no one escapes unscathed from what they repress. And here lies the great trap. You don't conquer the shadow through control, nor through cheap self-help, nor motivational quotes. You conquer it only when you stop fighting it, when you choose to sit down before what you most fear and listen, when you understand that your anger has something to say, that your pain has a story, that your fear wants to protect you, that your dark side is part of who you are and only wants to be accepted. This is the turning point, when you realize there is no freedom without integration, that as long as you try to kill parts of yourself, you'll remain divided, always at war. But when you begin to welcome those parts, you begin to become whole. To integrate the shadow is not to surrender to chaos. It is to create space for everything human within you to exist. It is to bring order to the underworld. It is to turn raw impulse into creative force, to transform your anger into assertiveness, your fear into wisdom, your pain into compassion, your instinct into power. This process is painful, frightening. It will shake everything you believe about yourself. But it's the only path to stop being a hostage to what controls you from within. And when you begin to integrate, you realize that the part of you that scared you the most was exactly what was missing for you to become whole. This is the point where a man begins to be reborn. Most men don't want freedom. They want comfort, the illusion of control, the facade of respect, the performance of strength. And the man who understands this, that man can no longer be controlled. You can exit this video right now and keep living the same way. Keep nurturing that strength that impresses others but eats you alive inside. Keep collecting power quotes, strategy books, philosophies of dominance, all to numb the fact that you can't even look yourself in the eye. Or you can stop running. You can decide today, now, to face what holds you back, not to show strength to others, but because you're tired of lying to yourself. Most won't do it. Most will hit play on the next video.
scroll the screen, keep distracting themselves with the next success tip, the next seduction technique, the next mental hack, all to avoid the only thing that truly transforms, the confrontation with truth. You don't need another mask. You need the courage to remove them all. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, the path to becoming who you truly are, requires crossing your own inner hell. And that's why almost no one does it, because it can't be outsourced. It can't be faked. You can't lie to the mirror. But if you have the courage to take that step, then you begin to free yourself. Not from systems, not from governments, but from the only prison that really matters, the prison of not being yourself. And when that day comes, everything changes. You become dangerous in a quiet way, uncontrollable, unpredictable, because you no longer play other people's games. You no longer need approval. You no longer need to win over anyone. You've already won the worst enemy, the one who lives inside you. So the choice is yours. You can close this video and keep pretending, or you can face the silence and begin to be reborn. But know this, either you master yourself, or you will be mastered. There is no third option.